Now, I'd like to conduct this discussion in a highly interactive way. I'm going to pose a question to each of the panelists. I will ask them for quick responses, and then I will throw the discussion open to the floor. My first question is to Michael Enright. Michael, in the last 60 years, there have been only 13 economies that have grown by an average of 7% or better for a sustained period of time. Of these 13 economies, one is from South America, one is from Africa, one is from Europe, one is from the Middle East. Now, you don't have to name which ones they are, but 9 are from Asia. Of the 9 from Asia, 5 are from East Asia: Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And 4 are from ASEAN: Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Now, when we look at these so-called Asian tigers, do we see common themes? Is there anything that stands out? And later on, in the course of the discussion, I'd like you to think of why the Philippines is not on that list. But maybe you can help us begin the discussion by providing us with some context. What stands out when we look at these Asian tigers?
Okay, actually the first thing that stands out is the set of differences. Because across the countries you mentioned, we have vastly different political systems, different economic philosophies, different roles of government in the economy, and of course very different starting points. Some started from a very low level, others started from a more advantageous position. But if we're trying to think of what are the common features, what are the similarities that seem to have enhanced the development, it's a relatively small number. I would say the first is the ability to mobilize resources. And in some cases, this first meant urbanization that moved people from almost subsistence level agriculture into city suburbs where they became accessible both as producers and as consumers for the regional and global economy. But also the mobilization of capital, either through almost nurturing and harnessing domestic capital, favoring investment over consumption, or the attraction of foreign capital. So a lot of the story actually is a story of resource mobilization. I would say the second main feature or commonality has been getting the basics right. And basics first means dealing with basic human needs, providing the adequate water, sanitation, public safety, housing, etc., that allow people to move their efforts beyond mere survival and into what we might call more productive uses of their time and efforts. One of the aspects of Hong Kong's development and Singapore's development that I think are hugely underrated was the institution of public housing. In both of those places, massive government public housing programs, including in Hong Kong, where government tends not to intervene, moved the vast majority of the population into a situation where housing was safe, it was adequate, where people had to spend less time worrying about simple survival and could spend much more time on other things. Getting the basics right also meant the basic systems. Not very advanced infrastructure in many cases, but adequate infrastructure. A third main feature is what I'll call adequate governance. Not necessarily world-class, but good enough. Good enough in terms of basic rule of law, good enough in terms of limits to corruption, if not elimination, which hasn't happened in many of the places you mentioned. But it's also government on occasion as a counterweight to monopoly and oligopoly, allowing enough of people's productive efforts to help themselves rather than be extracted in rent seeking. A fourth one would be links with the rest of the world. One of the key things over the last 40, 50 years has been obviously the globalization phenomenon. And what that has meant for developing countries is actually that countries have to provide less of the complete package today than ever before. And that has allowed many of the countries you mentioned to fit themselves into global production systems, to attract ideas, capital, people from abroad, to supplement, to complement what they had indigenously. Maybe the fifth one is a sense of pragmatism and realism. The idea that one had to go step by step, that asymmetric development might be the only possibility for development. When I see countries look at things like World Economic Forum rankings and say we have to fix everything at once, I know it's a recipe for disaster. So the ability to be pragmatic, take one step at a time, be realistic about what could be achieved, these to me are perhaps the commonalities.
Well, thank you, Michael. So ability to mobilize resources, getting basics right, adequate governance, links with the rest of the world, and pragmatism. Thank you. Turning now to Lance and Tony. The Secretary mentioned that in the latest Global Competitiveness Index, the Philippines has registered a remarkable improvement by 10 points from 85 to 75. And in fact, if you look around the world in these rankings, there are only 6 countries, including the Philippines, that have improved by this magnitude. Do you see this improvement in the environment that your businesses operate in? And what would you say is the biggest challenge confronting the Philippines in terms of doing business in this country? Maybe we start with Lance first and then Tony. What's the biggest challenge? Do you see this improvement in the business environment in your businesses?
I would start with the latter, answering the latter question. I think certainly there's been a marked improvement in the business environment in the Philippines. I think first it's primarily driven by sentiment. I'm echoing what Secretary Rojas mentioned, that there is a strong belief by the majority of the Filipino people that we have a leader who is trying to make things right, who is trying to do what is best for the entire nation rather than a privileged few. We're already beginning to see the benefits of some of the measures that he's taken, primarily on the fiscal front. From a business perspective, we are seeing that interest rates have dropped significantly. I can remember just 5 years ago, there was no such thing as a 5-year term loan. Today, we can borrow pesos 10 years at 6.5%. That makes a huge difference in terms of business, in terms of taking risks, in terms of taking long-term projects. We are more willing to take these kind of risks as we're pretty certain that we will not be bothered by unusual requests during the span of during the time we are pursuing these projects. I think this goes back to the problem, though, that we are trying to overcome maybe 50 years of I guess, weakened political institutions, entrenched corruption. And I think the concern is how do we create the momentum that ensures that beyond this term that we have a truly sustainable change in the way we do business in the Philippines.
Thank you very much. So you see a marked improvement in the business environment.
Yes.
Thank you. Tony?
Well, I think echoing what Lance has said, never have we seen a situation where all of the stars are aligned as far as the country is concerned. And obviously this has benefited all industries in the last 15 months or so. And of course, we have to give credit to the fact that government did take the right priority in terms of focusing on the governance issues. I think that's a very basic element that has been correctly done. I think what we are now looking for moving forward and responding to the second item related to the challenges would really be how we should now be translating all of these things in terms of trying to get into what I call as a more focused developmental mindset. Because I think this should really be the second major step that we should be doing as a people. And it is something that obviously will not just be the province of the executive branch. There has to be a right level of consensus across the board, all the way down to the judiciary, the legislature, local governments, because we do think that there are still continuing challenges in those particular areas. Now, I think it is inevitable. That's what we have seen in the survey regarding what are the challenges that the issue of poverty and unequal economic distribution is something that has to be addressed properly. And I think all of these things is still possible. I think if we will all be getting around to a point where we will be crafting a strategy where there will be inclusive growth so that we will be in a position to precisely address even that major challenge as we go along. But certainly I think we've got all of the ingredients today. Never have we seen a situation like this in all these years. And it is such a fantastic opportunity for the country as well as its people.
Thank you very much. So all the stars are aligning, ingredients are there, but need for a more focused development approach and high priority for inclusive growth.